Welcome back to TK Tennis. So let's talk about my experience and the review for Kirschbaum Max Power 125. Several people in the comments asked me to try Max Power Rough, but before I try a textured or a shaped string, I always like to try its round variant. So let's get into the review and talk about its characteristics. So we have Kirschbaum Max Power. It's round, it's 125, and it was strung at 50 pounds. So moving on to Snapback, it has that normal fast snapback that you get with most of the polys today. It doesn't have a hyper slick coating to it, so it doesn't get the hyper snapback, but most importantly, it does have very consistent snapback. And in terms of notching, sort of the normal notching that you'd expect, nothing dramatic. They do slide across each other quite well. They don't notch up too much until about the 5-hour mark in my case. Moving on to spin potential, I also give it a normal. It's a normal round poly, so it doesn't give you that extra 1 or 2% of spin potential that you might get with a shaped poly or a textured poly. So it gives you sort of that normal spin potential that you'd expect with any round poly. Moving on to power, this is where it gets interesting. The name of the string is Max Power. So the first thing you're thinking, of course, is this string is going to be extra powerful. That's not the case whatsoever. It has the normal power characteristic or level or profile that you'd expect out of any good quality poly. Some polys get like a normal plus from me, like Kirschbaum Super Smash would get like a little extra pop. And very few polys get sort of a high power profile. The one that comes to mind that does have or would meet that high power profile would be Restring Zero. But in this case, even though it's called max power, you don't get max power. You get the normal power that you'd expect. Accuracy is very good. It's very predictable, both in terms of its trajectory and its depth and its horizontal accuracy. There's nothing to write home about here. It's very good again. Durability, these strings got me about 6 hours, which is typical or normal for most of my polys, 6.5 hours. At the high side, it's about 8 hours. This was about 6.5 hours, so I give it a normal in terms of durability. On the lower end, some polys will last me only about 4 hours, like Restring Sync. That only lasted 4 hours. So when it gets to me about 6 or 7 hours, that's normal. Tension maintenance, I also give it a normal. With Kirschbaum Orange, that gets a little mushy after about 3 hours. That I would say has a lower end of tension maintenance. But on this one, it's sort of normal here as well. It's certainly not high like you'd get with Torna S7 or Head Lynx Tour and some others. Now moving on to feel, this one was hard to describe because it was semi-muted and semi-firm. But when you compare firm to crisp, this certainly didn't have a crisp feel. And you might ask, what's the difference between crisp and firm? And that's hard to explain. You just get the sensation. Sometimes it's a little firm and stiff, and sometimes it just has a nice, satisfying, crisp feeling. I would give this a semi-firm feeling and a muted feeling at the same time. It's certainly not harsh, and it's certainly not lively. All I can describe it as semi-muted and semi-firm. Moving on to stiffness feel, I give it a 5 out of 10. And again, comparing it to Kirschbaum Orange, which I give a 3 out of 10. So it's on the softer end in terms of feel on stiffness. This is sort of right in the middle. Anything between 3 and 6 is sort of where I like a string to be. 3 on if I'm preferring a softer poly, and more of a 5 or a 6 if I want something a little bit stiffer and crispier. And this I give a 5 out of 10. So all in all, this feels very similar to Super Smash, with the exception it's stiffer or firmer than Super Smash. And if you are asking what does stiffness feel mean, it's totally subjective. It's to what I feel. It has nothing to do with an actually measuring device and what you might find on TW University and how it rates stiffness in terms of how it was measured on some sort of measuring device. This is subjective. It's based on what I feel, because we all know that you can get a stiff string that measures high as stiff, but plays less stiff. So moving on to final grades, I give it for the intermediate level, that 3.5 to 4.0 level, a C+. For the advanced level and 4.0 to 5.0, a B+, and for high caliper players, a B. In terms of value, it's a B+ string. So let's talk about who is it for. It's for anyone seeking a semi-muted, semi-firm, relatively boring string. And I don't mean that necessarily in a bad way. There are people that like muted, boring strings. This is a blue-collar string that gets the job done with no fuss at a very budget-friendly price. This string is a performant quality poly that does everything really well, but has no standout qualities. It earns a B simply because it's ever so slightly less appealing than A-graded strings. So you might look at it and say, this is a B string, I didn't give it an A, I would never want to use it. We're talking about things that are so nuanced here that you could only tell if you're playing back-to-back or alternating between two different rackets or two different of the same rackets and testing strings every 5 or 10 minutes, alternating between shots. If you get this string and you put it in your racket and you use it one day and you use a different racket another day, you probably won't know a difference. You really have to be able to be playing with two sets of string back and forth in identical rackets to sort of feel these nuances between strings. Would I use it again? No, just because nothing stands out, and that's why I gave it a B. I sort of give it a B for boring, and don't mistake B for boring as B for bad. These are not bad strings. These are excellent strings. They just don't have anything that stands out, and that's why you can't give it an A minus or an A or never mind an A plus. I want something to stand out. Everything about these strings are very workmanlike, and they get the job done, but there's really nothing exciting about them. Now you might ask, will I try the rough variant? Probably at some point, but these strings in general don't really excite me too much. So I may or may not do a rough variant, and if I do, it'll probably be sometime. Now, if you're interested in helping me pay for some of these strings to do more string reviews, don't forget you can buy me a string using the Buy Me a Coffee link that's listed down in the description below or in the first comment. So that's it for this review. I hope you enjoy these reviews. Remember to like and subscribe, and I will see you in the next ace.